Hello, I am Jason Gillard with EDL 851, the case study. To summarize the case, the principal of an unnamed school was finishing his observations along with the paperwork. All observations went well with the exception of one teacher, Mrs. Stevens. The principal made several notes about concerns of Mrs. Stevens' classroom management, ability to motivate students, and overall effectiveness. The principal had discussions with Mrs. Stevens about his observations and explained areas he'd like to see improvement. However, it wasn't necessarily stated, and a concern Mrs. Stevens had was that the principal didn't provide any examples or necessarily any how-to. He just said, these are the areas that I see that are concerning to me. Mrs. Stevens was very defensive and unreceptive to the feedback, and the principal opted to not renew her contract. Mrs. Stevens was not happy with the decision and stated she'd like to take this to court if left unchanged. The principal must now make a decision of whether or not to stick to his decision to not renew the contract. The legal issues that are involved in the case, in terms of physically hurt, nobody was hurt in that way, but Mrs. Stevens was emotionally upset, and obviously it's a big life change if she were to be fired. The principal's reputation is also kind of a concern, because if Mrs. Stevens does take this to court and it does show that he doesn't necessarily have the information or the ability to necessarily not bring her back. So just that's kind of on the line, because if you're going to go as far as court, you better be sure that you have everything in place to be able to go through with that decision. Also, the students, those are the people that are most affected by a bad teacher, and they're not receiving the best quality of education at the time. The action does not contravene any existing law. The principal does have the right to not renew a contract. The decision might ultimately end up in court, and the teacher does have a right to fight for her job if she feels like it is being treated unfairly. Through his observations, the principal has determined Mrs. Stevens was not meeting expectations and decided to not renew her contract, in which she plans to fight against. These are the facts. The people are involved: the principal, Mrs. Stevens, superintendent, who is the person that the principal go through for final confirmation, and then to agree to not go through. So any decision that the principal makes, it does need to be cleared through the school board. The place or the setting would be the school. And then kind of what's happening is it's a matter of observations. Through the observations, the principal determined that she wasn't meeting his expectations and standards of the school, as well as it is a contract issue now. Those observations led to it being a contract renewal issue. The conflict could have an effect on the stakeholders. So for the principal, I think it could definitely damage his reputation if it were to end up going to court and he didn't have enough to make that decision. Also, time spent in court. Already being a principal, you spend a lot of time with everything that involves your day-to-day and long-term goals. So spending even time added to it in court would really also create a lot of stress, and also ruin relationships with the teachers, specifically Mrs. Stevens. But I also think that if something were to be looked at, perception is going to be viewed differently across the faculty, but it could definitely, as any time a teacher is not brought back, it could damage the relationships that he has with the other teachers. Mrs. Stevens, if she were to lose her job, that's going to affect her life, obviously, because then at that point she has to look for a new job, and then of course financially she's going to be concerned. But also, she's difficult to work with. She hasn't necessarily received the feedback that well, and she's kind of in denial and where she's at with her classroom management. So it does tend to have an effect, especially if he's bringing up these concerns to her and she doesn't take them well, now she just feels like this has that he's kind of gunning for her job. And then students, they're not receiving the proper education. Not all stakeholders have been consulted. At this point, you could very easily have a student survey. While you can't take exactly everything that the students say, because some students probably really like the fact that they kind of do whatever they want. And, if a student like that says that they should keep her, then maybe that's a bigger concern. But yes, student survey would help get some feedback for sure. Also the superintendent, whether it's advice or in terms of his expectations with teachers and how to deal with contract renewals. And then other teachers. You can definitely get feedback from other teachers, not only through the grapevine of what they hear from students, but their observations and seeing what they've kind of observed from her and what their personal opinion. But again, you can only take that so far. Your options. You can renew Mrs. Stevens' contract. That's the first one. So go ahead and give up your position and your kind of power and give Mrs. Stevens a contract renewal. Option number 2, go through with the initial decision, which is don't renew Mrs. Stevens' contract. Or 3, renew the contract under certain conditions, including a mentorship. So the pros and cons for each one, we're looking at option 1, to renew Mrs. Stevens' contract. For the pros, you will stay away from court. If you give that, you're kind of giving in. You also don't have to make a rush decision. It could buy you more time, and it does give Mrs. Stevens a second chance. However, it does show a weakness or maybe lack of control and even lack of execution. If you say you're going to do something, you need to go through with it. And damage has already been done. That relationship between the teacher and principal has already been strained at this point, and so sometimes it's definitely going to be past a point of return. Option 2, go through with the initial decision. The pros for this, it holds the teacher to a standard, and not just Ms. Stevens, but all teachers. If you're not meeting the expectations and standards of the principal, then you can't work there. And so if you're not willing to change and meet those expectations, you need to find a different job. Trusting yourself and the system. I think that's the most important thing as the principal. You have to be able to trust yourself because you're in a very big position to make decisions. And if you don't trust yourself and the system that you're using, it's a flawed system. So you've got to find what's the best thing to do for you, which is go through the system. And if that's how the observation system works, you got to follow through with it. However, the cons, you do end up in court at this point if she does decide to go through with fighting for her job. It is a long process and it's also expensive. And there's a possible lawsuit, which at that point it does affect the school as a whole. And then option 3, renew the contract under certain conditions, including a mentorship. The pros to this, it could improve her ability to teach and control her classroom, and overall the students will be better off and the school will be better off. It does give her a second chance, but it also still shows the ability to be an effective principal. You're still showing your control. You're still holding the teachers to high expectations and standards. And ultimately, as the principal, you're the deciding factor in whether she keeps her job or not. And so you are giving her a chance. But you're saying you need to meet my expectations, and this is your final chance. However, it could just be delaying the inevitable, whether it's her losing her job and even going further with that, going to court. More students lose out on an education. So if you go ahead and give her another year, extend her, and she doesn't improve, another year of students lose out on a good education. So the best choice, I do believe, is option 3, which is to renew the contract under certain conditions, including a mentorship. This provides the ability for the teacher to improve with more specific mentorship. Now, this can also give the principal another entire year to gather the information that he would need to make it a definitive decision that would hold well in court. The biggest concern with just going ahead and not renewing her contract is maybe he doesn't have enough that will hold up well in court. So giving another year to collect, observe more, will give him everything he needs with the specific goal of attaining that information and data and proof. And if the mentorship did work, the teacher would keep her job and be providing a quality education for the students. And that's who ultimately matters the most, the students. And if she can change and make her teaching very effective, then all the better. And as a principal, you look better because you've put that teacher to be in a position to be successful. Implementation of option 3. So to begin with, you're going to have another discussion with Mrs. Stevens and have that contract agreement. And I would even sit down with the superintendent in the room and explain that we're going to renew your contract, but you have to do it under these conditions. And that is, we're going to put you through a mentorship program. And you're going to assign a mentor. And this is going to be a person in the building that you trust. It's a teacher that has a great reputation, a teacher that is actively demonstrating qualities of a very highly effective teacher, one that you trust, one that you have a good relationship with. And then you're going to lay out the expectations for the mentorship program. This teacher must be observed by the mentor a certain amount of times. It might be once a month, it might be a couple times a month, or it might be at first it's 2 times a month, or maybe 4 times a month, and then it slowly dwindles down. Or if you believe that the teacher could use more observation times, so that could be added in there as well. They need to have weekly or even bi-weekly meetings. These meetings are going to consist of specific instruction skills and areas of improvement for focus areas, and then also being able to set goals. I want this done by this time, and this gives the teacher something to work for, but also something for the mentor to kind of look for in their observations. Then as a principal, you're going to observe the teacher twice per semester, which might be a bit much for that teacher in that relationship. But the big thing is, in that initial contract meeting, you need to just explain to the teacher as a principal that you are on her team and you want her to be here, and you really do need to start building that relationship better. I think before this mentorship program even starts, you as a principal, you need to work on that relationship with a teacher, because at this point she does see you as an enemy and she doesn't see you in a position of helping her. So really getting her to understand that you're on her team, you just want what's best for her, and you want her to be there. And I think that will help go a long way, just helping her understand why you're doing this. If there is obvious progress, you can continue the program for another year. If the teacher meets those expectations within a year, she doesn't even have to continue the mentorship program. But I do believe it would be best to put her in a 2-year program just to make sure she continues her progress. If there is no progress after a year, you go forward with determination, because at that point you've given her everything you could. You've given her a mentor. You're giving her feedback, specific feedback with examples of how she can improve. And if she hasn't at that point, she's not willing. And at this point, she's dead weight to the faculty and the school. So after a year, if there's no progress, she's not willing to work with you. You have the data, you have the information, and you have all the physical examples that you would need that would hold up in court. And you have the support of the mentor teacher, which would be also very important in court, that teacher, Mrs. Stevens, wasn't willing to change for the better. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for listening.